Hi everyone, welcome to Serverless Application in Azure tutorial. I am Arugya Das. In this tutorial, we will learn about serverless architecture and how to build serverless application in Azure using Azure API Management, Azure Function App, and Azure SQL Database. For the web app, I will deploy and run React app as front end from my local. Now, let's go into the details. First, let's see about serverless architecture. Serverless architecture is an approach to software design that allows developers to build and run applications and services without having to manage the underlying infrastructure. With the serverless application, the application still runs on servers, but the cloud service provider handles the automatic provisioning, scaling, and management of the infrastructure required to run the application. This approach enables developers to increase their focus on the business logic and add more values to the core of the business. To build a serverless application in Azure, the below serverless services can be used. Azure API Management as HTTP Gateway Service and Azure Function App as a compute service to process the request, and Azure SQL Database as a database to store the data. As you can see in the below image, the client app calls the API Management API, and the API Management Gateway routes the request to Azure Function App, and Azure Function App interacts with Azure SQL Database for CRUD operations and returns the data to Azure Function App, and in turn Azure Function App returns the response to API Management, and finally API Management returns the response to the client app. Next, serverless services Azure. Let me explain briefly about the serverless services in Azure for building a serverless application. First, Azure API Management. It's a fully managed platform as a service that helps developers to securely expose their APIs to external and internal customers. It enables us to create, publish, and manage APIs. Azure API Management works by providing a layer between API clients and the backend API services that they access. The API Management Service is responsible for forwarding the request to the backend API service and return back the response to the client app. Next, Azure Function App. Azure Function App is a serverless solution that allows us to write less code, maintain less infrastructure, and save on costs. Programs can be written in Java, Node.js, Python, .NET, and so on. It provides updated infrastructure, which could be the latest runtime stack and the OS to run the code. Next, Azure SQL Database. It's a fully managed platform as a service database engine that handles automatically the database management functions such as upgrading, patching, backups, and monitoring without manual intervention. As a multi-model database, it enables to store and work with the data in multiple formats, relational data as well as non-relational data such as graph, JSON, or XML documents, spatial data, and key value pairs. Next, prerequisites. For this tutorial, you need to have the below setup completed beforehand. First, Azure account. You need to have an Azure account with valid subscription, And please refer to this project GitHub repository for the account creation link. Next, you need to have a Microsoft Entra ID user with the privileges for creating and managing API Management API, Azure Function App, and Azure SQL Database. Next, installation on local machine. You need to have Visual Studio Code installed and then install Azure Function Core Tools and Azure Functions extension for deploying Azure Functions into your subscription. You also need to have installed Git, Node.js for cloning repository and running the React app to test the serverless application. The download links are mentioned in the README file of this project repository named serverless-app-azure-demo. And finally, you need to have the React app deployed locally and running. For React app, clone serverless-app-react-azure repository, and for function app, clone serverless-app-azure-demo repository. Next, serverless application hands-on. In this hands-on, we will be performing the below activities to build the serverless application in Azure. First, Azure SQL Database. From Azure portal, we will create a single database and do the necessary configuration setting. Next, Function App. From Azure portal, we will create an Azure Function App and set the environment variables required for connecting the SQL database and deploy Azure function from VS Code. Next, Azure API Management. Create a new Azure API Management instance from the Azure portal, then import the Azure Function App as an API from the portal. Next, React app. I have created a simple React app which will query and insert customer information to the Azure SQL database. One important thing, I have created a detailed tutorial video for Azure SQL Database, Azure Function App, and API Management. You can watch if you want to dive deep into these Azure serverless services. The YouTube links are provided in the GitHub repository of this project. Next, we will test the serverless application. Once the React app starts running locally, we will input the customer data and test and see if the query and insertion are successful or not. Next, regarding the source code, it is available in my GitHub account and the repository links are given in the description. The complete steps for this tutorial are well described in the README file of this project. So please refer to them. Now let's do the hands-on. I have signed into my Azure account. As a first step, let's create the Azure SQL database. For this, in the search box, enter SQL database. Click on this SQL database icon and here click on this create SQL database. So Azure offers a special offer to create a free serverless database. Let's make use of that offer by clicking this apply offer button. Next, let's provide the required details. For the resource group, if you have already one, select it or create a new resource group. And next, enter the database name. Once you provide the database name, we need to create a server on which the database will be running. For that, click this create new and provide the server details. So Here for the server name, enter the server name, then provide the location. After you provide the location, we need to provide the authentication method through which we will be connecting the database. Here we have three different methods. For this, I will go for use SQL authentication, that is providing username and password. We will be connecting to the SQL database. Here provide the username and the password. So please make note of this username and password because it's required in the Azure Function App to connect to the Azure SQL Database. So please do not forget to keep a note of the username and the password. Once the details are entered, click on OK. Now the database server is created. Next, let's go to the networking tab. Here, we will be connecting the database through public. So click on this public endpoint. Once this is enabled, then allow Azure services and resources to access this server. Please set this to yes, since we will be connecting from the Azure Function App to this database. And next, since we will be connecting to the database and adding some rows, click on this allow current client IP address to yes, because we will be connecting the database from local machine. For other things, leave it as default values. Next, click on the security. Here, I will go for the default values. Click on additional settings. Here also, we will go with the default values. Click on tags. I will not provide any tags. Click on review and create. Check whether the details what we have entered is correct or not. Then click on this create button and this will create the Azure SQL database. So this may take a few seconds or minutes to create the database. So let me pause this video until the database is created. The database creation has been completed. Now let's go to the database, connect to the database and insert a record. So for this, click on this go to resource. Here, click on this query editor. As I said, we will be connecting through the username and password. Here, since we have entered the username, it automatically populates. Now let's enter the password. Then click OK to connect to the database from the Azure portal's query editor. Yes, we have connected to the SQL database. Now let's create a table. If you click on this left side here, we have the table view stored procedures. Since we don't have any tables, it will not show anything. Here you can see the database name here. Now let's create a table using this script. So here just we will create a customers table with three columns. One is customer ID, name and another one is email. So here let me explain about this customer ID. This is a identity column. That is, this identity means it's a sequence column. That is, the customer ID value will be automatically inserted and incremented. We will not input this customer ID. So this identity means that it's a sequence column which will be populated automatically. Now let's run this query and it's completed successfully. Next, let's insert one record. Copy this. So for the SQL script, you can find in the GitHub. Click on run. So it says one record, affected rows 1. Now let's run this select query and see if the data is inserted properly or not. Yes, so you can see that the customer ID. So for the insert, we didn't input the customer ID. It's automatically populated the name and the email. Now we have created the database successfully and inserted one record, and we will be connecting to this database from Azure Function App. Now next, let's go and create the Azure Function App. As a second step, now let's create the function app. For this, in the search box, type function app. So this will come up, click on this, and here click create function app. So as for the hosting plan, let's select the consumption as it has 1 million executions free per month. Select this and click on the select button. Next, let's provide the details. Resource group, I will choose one, and the function app name. Let's enter the function app name. Next, for the runtime stack, I will select Node.js. So the latest version it will display, and select the location. To that, I will go for the operating system as Linux. Next, click on this storage button. So as I don't have any storage, let it create a new one. Then I don't need files, Azure files connection. So these details I will leave it as default. Next, click on networking. So see that this is enabled. Enable public access is on, since we'll be accessing through publicly. Next, click on monitoring. And for this enable application insights, I don't need. So click on no. Then next click on deployment. Since we are in the consumption plan, we will not have any options for this. Next click on tags. I will not enter anything. So click review and create and check if the details what you entered is correct or not. Then click on create button to create the function app. So this may take a few seconds or a minute. Until then, I will pause the video. The function app deployment has been completed. Now let's go to the function app service and do some settings. For this, click this go to resource. So before deploying the Azure functions into the function app, we need to set up some environment variables, that is to connect the database from Azure function. For that, click this environment variables and add some variables such as username, password, and so on. For that, click this add button and enter the value here. Click apply. Next, the password. Click add password value. So please be careful that when you created the database, you must have used the username and the password. So these two values should match which you gave while creating the Azure SQL database. Next, add the database server name environment variable. Add. So for this, if you want to find the server name, you can go to the Azure SQL database which you created. In the overview tab, you will find the server name. Click on this copy and put it here and click apply. Next, the database name we need to add. Click DB name. Click add. So same as the database name, you can go here to the Azure SQL database. So here you will find this is the database name. Copy it here and add it and click apply. Now we have added DB name, password, server name and username which are required to connect to the Azure SQL database. Click on apply to reflect the changes and click confirm so that the environment variables are successfully added. Yes, it's successfully added here. Now let's go and deploy the Node.js function which will be used to connect to the Azure SQL database. As I mentioned in the prerequisites, you need to have cloned the Azure Function App and the React app repository into your local folder. So I have already cloned those repositories and I have opened the Azure functions in the Visual Studio Code. So for this, to deploy the Azure functions from Visual Studio Code, you need to have some setup completed. If you need to know how to deploy Azure functions from VS Code, I have already a complete tutorial created for this, how to deploy Azure function from VS Code to Azure Function App. Now, as I have opened the code, now let's deploy these Azure functions from VS Code. Before deploying, let me explain briefly what this function does. So this is a Node.js function. Here, in the first line, we import the Azure Functions SDK into the app object so that we can use HTTP triggered Azure function. Next, we are importing the MySQL package to connect to the Azure SQL database. Here we are mentioning the database configuration parameters. That is, as you are aware, when we created the function app, we created these environment variables: username, password, server name, database name. This process.env will access the function app environment variables and the values will be replaced here. Next, we are adding a variable and setting the value as content type as application or JSON. Next, we are opening a connection and checking. As you know, for this serverless application, we will be using API management API. So here, when the method is get, we are checking if the method is get and do this operation. Else if the method is post and do this operation. So in case of get method, we are checking the query parameter, whether if it has a key as ID. So checking that ID, then we are assigning its value to this customer ID variable. And here we are checking if the query parameter has a value or not. If it doesn't, then we are returning. And if the query parameter does not have the key as ID, then this message will be passed back. And we will return this response. Next, if the query parameter has the proper value, then we will open the connection and select the data from the customers table and pass the ID value here. So this at ID will pass the query parameter ID which has the value. And next, and we are getting that return value into the result set. So this select queries output will be stored in the result set and we are returning here the result set as response data. So here that response will be passed back. The result data will be passed back. That is the query output. Next, if it is a post method, then we are having two fields or columns, that is name and email. Here this customer object, here this request.json will get the body and assign it to the customer object. And the customer object will be having two fields, name and email. Next, we are checking if the request payload has name and email properties. If they do not have, then it will return this message. If that has, then this will return this response data. That is if it doesn't have. Next, if everything is okay, it will execute the insert query. So whatever the request payload, that is the name and the email value, will be inserted into the customers table and return the message one row successfully inserted. So this is a high level, and if there is any exception, it will catch that exception and return. And here finally, to avoid resource leaks, we are closing that connection. And whenever this Azure function is called, this is the entry point app.http. So here we are mentioning the function name and the methods what it will be used. Finally, we are exporting this process.request. This process request, this is the function which will be called once the function app is called. So this is a high level explanation of the function app program. Now let's deploy these functions into the Azure function app. For this, press F1 to open the command palette and type Azure functions. So here it will display deploy to function app. Select this, and since we have already created a function app, it will display the function app here. So select your function app and deploy it to that. So I will select my function app. It will ask for whether you want to deploy it or not. Select this deploy button, and the process will start deploying to the Azure Function App. You can see running pre-deploy task and so on. So this deployment may take a few seconds or few minutes. Until then, I will pause my video and come back once it's completed. Yes, the deployment has been completed. Now let's go to the Azure portal and check whether the function is successfully deployed or not. Now we are in the Azure Function App Service and in the Overview tab. As we can see here, the Azure function has been deployed successfully. Now let's click on this and open the function. Here we can see that our Azure function has been successfully deployed from the VS Code. Now let's go and create the Azure API management, in which we will be calling this function app. For this, I will open a new tab, click on this and input Azure API management. Here in the search box, type API management. You can see that API management service. Click on this and click create API management service. So here enter the details, the subscription, the resource group and the region, then the API name. I will put React. So if the name is already available, it will throw error. Next, enter the organization name. Maybe it can be a dummy name. Then enter the email. Be careful for the pricing tier. Select consumption so that you don't incur costs. Next, select on this monitor and secure. Here I will leave this as a default. Then click on this virtual network. As this is a consumption plan, so we will not have the virtual network or private endpoint. Then for the managed identity, I will not choose anything. Then click on next tags. Then click review and install. Here check whether the details you have entered are correct or not. If you are sure that whatever you have entered is accurate, then click on create button to create the API. So this may take a few seconds or minutes. Let me pause this video until it gets created. The API management deployment has been completed. Now let's go to the API management service and do the necessary setup. Here, to access the function app, we need to import the function app in the API management. For that, click this APIs, and here you will see the services which can be imported or integrated with the API management. For our purpose, we will be integrating or importing the function app. So scroll down, here is the function app service. Click on this and it will take you to this screen. Select this full and click this browse button, and here click this select to select your function. Here all your functions will be displayed. I have only one function, so it is displaying that one. Select that and click this select button. Once the function is selected, you can see which all methods will be using. Get and post methods will be using. Click on this select. Here we have entered which function we are importing, function app we are importing to this API management. Here one thing to be noted is API URL prefix, suffix. So here we can enter any name you want. So I will enter as my customer as my prefix. Okay. So apart from this, you can enter description, name, all these things if you want. So I will leave other things as blank. Here you can note the base URL for the API will be this one. Click on create button and it will create the it will import the Azure Function App into the API management. Once that's done, there are certain other things to be set up. Since we are creating a serverless application and this API will be called from outside, we need to set up first the CORS, that is cross origin resource sharing. For this, click on this design, and here we need to set up add a policy which will allow CORS. For this, click on this add policy, and here you can see this allow cross origin resource sharing. Select this one and we need to set certain parameters. So here in this allowed origins, click this allowed origins. I will put star to allow any origin here, and for these methods, so I will use get, head, post, put, and put and patch. For the allowed headers also I will put star to allow all headers, and expose header also I will put star. After entering this, now then click on save. As I said, so this API will be called from React app. We need to do the CORS setting. Once we have done, you can see here whether the CORS is added here or not. See here, it's added. Next, we need to go to settings and do another parameter, that is here this subscription required. So if this checkbox is enabled, we need to pass the subscription head in the header, this value and the subscription key. So I don't want to pass this header. So I will uncheck this one. Yes, and click this save button. Now we have created the API and imported the function app into this API management. If you want to know in more detail, I have created a video on API, Azure API management and how to integrate Azure Function App to this API management. You can check that video and learn more. Now we need to know the URL to call this URL in our React app. Here you can click this select method and this is the path. We have completed the API management creation and the importing of the function app into the API management. Now let's create the React app or deploy the React app locally and call this API from the React app. I have cloned the React app repository to my local folder and opened it in the Visual Studio Code. Now let's build and run the React app locally. For this, first let's go to the app.js function and we need to replace the API URL. So please don't forget to copy the API URL and replace it here. For this, now let's go to the Azure portal and copy the URL. So to get the URL, go to your API and in the APIs, click on this API, then click on settings. Here you will find the base URL and you need to get the base URL and in the design, if you click this get or the post method, you will find the path. So you need to add this path along with the base URL. If you want to get the complete URL, simply click on this test. After clicking the test, either select get or post. Then you will find the URL here. So here it is given request URL. Copy this URL, then go to the VS Code and paste it here. So this is the complete URL for your API. Let me briefly explain about this program. This import React, what it does is, it imports a React library for writing React components. Next, this import access, it's a JavaScript library for making HTTP requests. Next, this is the function. Here, these two lines of code will be used for the get method and these two will be used for the post method. Here, this is a response object which will hold the response data and this set response function will set the response data to the response object. Here, this customer ID will be set as the query parameter, this object, and this set query will set the value to this customer ID. And here use state, it's a React hook that is used to add state to the functional components. Next here, this form data object will hold these name and email properties and these two, for these two the values will be set by this set form data. So whenever we enter input to this name field or email field, that is in the here in the return statement which will render this HTML page. Here you can see here in this add new customer, I have name and email field. These two, whenever we enter value, this will be set into the form data of this name and email. Next, we are having this API URL. And another thing, this handle change will assign the input value whenever we enter value to this name and email field. This handle change, that is the on change event, will be calling this handle change function, and the value will be added to the name and the email properties. Then next, this get data function. This is where the actual get method is called. So here, using this Axios JavaScript library, this get API, we are calling this API management get method and passing this query parameter. Next, and once it returns the result, that is set into this set response, which will be setting this result.data. And next, this handle post. So this is where we call this post method of that API management. Here we are using this access.post library to call the API management post method. So once that response is returned, we are using this set response data to set that value. We can see here, as I said, here this is the response data to hold that values, and this set response data function will set the value to that object. So next, once that is done, this return, as I said, this is the entry point. Once this function is called, it will return, it will render this HTML page. Here, first it will display the header, then it will display header 2 as view customer, where it will have a one field, customer ID. If we input the customer ID, then it will, you can see this on change event will be called, and this set query function will set this value. Then once we click the search button, it will invoke that get. Here you can see that once that button is clicked on this on click event, this get data function will be called. This function will be called, and it will call the get method of that API management. And next, coming to the post method, here we have the add new customer header, where we have two fields, name and email. And also you can see that on change, this handle change will, it will call this handle change function, and it will set the value. The same way here also the value will be set. And below we will have a button called handle add button, where on the on click event it will call the handle post function. So here you can see this handle post function, it will call this one, and it will call the API management post method. And finally, whenever that response is returned, here you can see this JSON start string file. It will convert the JSON object to the string and display the result in the browser. So that's all, a high level explanation of this React app. Now let's deploy this React app locally and run it. Before deploying and starting the React app, please do not forget to save the file. Since we have replaced the URL, the API URL, we need to save the file so that that API URL will get reflected. Okay, so I have saved it. Now let's go to view menu, open the terminal, and do the necessary setup. Here I want to tell one thing, that is, since we have cloned the repository from the source code from the repository, the npm, the node modules may be missing. For this we have to first install the node modules. Let's use this npm install command and install the node modules. This may take a few seconds. Let's wait. Let me pause this video until it gets completed. Yes, the node module installation has been completed successfully. you can see that a new folder called node modules has been created here, and the node module components are installed here. Next, we need to build the app using the npm run build command. For this, run this command and it will build the app. This also may take a few seconds or minutes. Let me pause this video and come back. The build has completed successfully, and you can see the build folder which is created newly. Once the build is completed successfully, we need to have a HTTP server locally running and serve the files. For this, we need to run the next two subsequent commands. So to serve the files using a HTTP local server, run this command npm install -g serve. This will install the HTTP server. And next, let's serve the files using this command serve-s build. Yes, now the React app is deployed and it's running. Now let's test it from the browser. For that, copy this URL and paste it in the browser. Yes, the React app is running now. Now let's enter the customer ID 1 and check whether the data is retrieved successfully or not. As you remember, when we created the SQL database, we inserted one record. Click on this search button. Yes, it has retrieved the value successfully. Now let's go to the SQL database and check the data is correctly displayed or not. Now run the query. Yes, you can see that the data displayed here 1 Suzuki Azure SQL DB matches. Now let's insert some records from here and check whether it is getting inserted properly or not. Name, I will type, and email, my email at gmail.com. Click this add button. Yes, the message it has written is one row successfully inserted. Now let's go to the Azure SQL database and check whether the data is inserted successfully or not. Yes, you can see that a new record has been created. Now let's check this data is retrieved successfully or not in our application. Now I will enter customer ID as 2 and click search. Yes, you can see that the data is getting retrieved successfully. So from React app, we are able to query the data and insert the data. If you need, we can insert some more data and check it. Azure serverless. Now I am adding Azure. Click on this button and now it should have inserted another record. Let's go to here, query. You can see that 3 records. Now let's retrieve this record from our React application. Give 3 and click search. So you can see that customer ID is 3 and the data is retrieved successfully. Now if I give a non-existent record, it will return null here, it will be empty. So we have successfully created our first serverless application using React as the front end. Now we have created many resources for this tutorial. Let's clean up those resources. Let's go to the Azure portal and go to the home service homepage and click on the resource group to delete all the resources so that we will not incur unnecessary costs. Click on this name and click here, select all the resources and click delete button. So this will ask for confirmation, enter delete and click on delete. So this may take a few minutes to delete all the resources, and so please check from your side when you are doing the hands-on that all the resources are deleted successfully. That's all in this tutorial. Thank you very much for your time and patience in watching this long video. A simple and humble request, please like, subscribe and share to your friends if you found this video useful. Thank you once again.